Hey, everybody. Coming at you with another chapter. We're starting another new chapter in our cannabis history by Martin Booth. Gonna go ahead and get into it. The herb Pantagruelion, chapter 6. This is part 9, I think it is. Yeah, pretty sure it is. So here we go. The Crusaders may have heard of hashish, but it is unlikely they associated it with hemp, which was to them, being Europeans, a source of fiber and folk remedies. Huh. Well, here we go. I was thinking to myself the other night, after doing one of these, where's hemp at? It hadn't really. I mean, the first, you had a little bit in the second chapter, but, the Chinese part got into it a little bit. But, hemp's been all the way through hemp, used in so many other ways besides cannabis being a drug and smoked or eaten or whatever. So here we go with a little bit more of that. That's good. The place of hemp in European folklore was well established by the 11th century. In Baltic countries, where the dead were said to return on Christmas Eve, a hemp seed soup called semeniatka was brewed for their spirit's succor, whilst Ukrainians traditionally made a similar hemp dish for what they call Three Kings Day, that on which the Magi were said to have borne their gifts to the infant Christ. In some places, these traditions are still extant. Even now, hemp seed is used in Poland to divine romantic attachments, thrown at weddings in place of rice or confetti, and the subject of a dance by married women on Shrove Tuesday. In southern Russia, on St. John's Eve, farmers used to feed hemp flowers to livestock to ward off evil and illness, whilst young women still put hemp seed in their pockets as they whisper charms to bring them romance. The same practice used to be carried out in the British Isles. Across Europe, festivals were once held where hemp was burnt, the smoke supposed to possess magical properties that cleansed and protected against disease. Superstition in many parts of Europe also imbued hemp with semi-sympathetic magical properties. Farmers would plant their hemp seed on the saints' days of particularly tall saints to encourage its growth. That's funny. In the Ardennes, it was believed the hemp crop would flourish if, on the first Sunday in Lent, the farmers' wives got drunk, whilst in the mountains of the Vosges, rural families danced on their house roofs on the day of the Epiphany, and in Swabia, young men and women jumped over a bonfire to achieve the same end. Partly because of its psychoactive potential, hemp was widely used throughout Europe as a folk medicine, just as it was in many other parts of the world. Much of this was as a result of the reliance both physicians and folk doctors placed upon Dioscorides materia medica. And that was discussed in a previous chapter, in a previous part of my series. The materia medica is considered a central medical text until well into the 17th century. And it's the 1600s. The elements treated with cannabis were many. It was used as an analgesic or anesthetic to combat earache, toothache. It was believed it drugged or put to sleep the worms that caused the pain. Rheumatism, arthritis, menstrual and labor pains, headaches and migraines, and a large number of similar discomforts. It was also prescribed for epilepsy, inflammation, coughs, convulsions, fever, and jaundice. I mean, it's so funny. Our government says, where's the evidence? Where's the... It's all in our history. They just don't want to see it. They don't want to see it or acknowledge it. That's funny. So everything: coughs, convulsions, fever, and jaundice. Okay, a paste of cannabis flowers, olive oil, and wax or animal fat was used as an ointment for open wounds. Sometimes the smoke of burning hemp, on occasion with henbane, was inhaled. At others, the leaf was chewed or made into a potion in hot water. What was good for humans was also deemed of value to animals, hemp being a vital veterinary herb for centuries. During the Middle Ages, hemp was central to any herbalist's medicine cabinet. William Turner, interesting. William Turner, the naturalist considered the first English botanist, praised it in his New Herbal, published in 1538. It was the first English herbal to contain original material derived from Turner's own researches and studies while a student at Pembroke Hall, Cambridge. Pietro Andrea Gregorio Mattioli, the noted Italian botanist, who translated and wrote a detailed commentary on Dioscorides' work in 1544, identified the male and female hemp plants and promoted it as a therapeutic herb. John Gerard, the author of The Herbal, or General History of Plants, in 1597, which, being an index of over 1,000 plant species, was in part based upon the work of the Flemish botanist Rembertus Dodoens, or Dodans, I'm not sure, and the Italian Jacob Theodorus Tabernaemontanus, also sang its praises. The English cleric Robert Burton, one time incumbent of St. Thomas Church, Oxford, advocated cannabis as a treatment for depression in his The Anatomy of Melancholy, published in 1621. Yet it was the herbalist Nicholas Culpeper who was to draw all the previous information together succinctly in his A Physical Directory, published in 1649. Sometimes referred to as Culpeper's The Complete Herbal, it brought together all the astrological, alchemical, and scientific information available in an herbalist's pharmacopoeia. In it, he wrote of hemp. And this is in italics, so it's in quotes. Okay. So, quote, "The seed expels wind. Boiled in milk and taken, it helps those..." Now remember, let me just stop us there. This is from 1649, okay? From a physical directory, okay? Or the Culpeper's Complete Herbal. It's the same thing, 1649. Okay, let me start over. Quote, "The seed expels wind. Boiled in milk and taken, it helps those that have a hot or dry cough. An emulsion made from the seed is good for jaundice, particularly if there be an ague accompanying it, for it opens obstructions of the gall and causes digestion of choler. The emulsion or decoction of the seed stays the lax and continual fluxes, eases the colic, and allays the troublesome humors of the bowels. It also stays bleeding at the mouth, nose, and other places. It kills worms in man or beast. And if the juice is dropped into the ears, it will kill worms in them and draw forth earwigs or other living creatures. Okay, that was effective. For that. The decoction, we're still in the quote, okay? The decoction of the root allays inflammations of the head or any other parts. The herb or distilled water of it does the same. A decoction of the root eases gouty pains, hard knots in the joints, and pain in the sinews and hips. The fresh root mixed with a little oil and butter is good for burns. Close quote. Okay. That's from that book. 1649, Culpeper. Culpeper did not, of course, comment upon cannabis' psychoactive potential. For the plant he would have known, growing in a temperate clime, would have produced little THC. There'd still be some. But not as much as more subtropical and tropical climate zones. Okay. Or up in altitude with a long enough warm period of the year. Okay. Not only physicians and herbalists use cannabis, sorcerers did too. Consequently, it was not long before the Christian church moved against it. In 1231, Pope Gregory IX initiated the Holy Inquisition. Its aim to root out and destroy the heresies of the previous 2 centuries. Hemp, being regarded as sorcerous, was outlawed as heretical. Those who used it, whether for medical purposes or divination, were branded as witches, who in turn were considered heretics. The persecution of witches across Europe commenced in earnest in 1484 with the publication of a papal bull issued by Pope Innocent VIII, entitled Summus Desiderantes. This was to appear as a preface to the Malleus Maleficarum, which appeared 2 years later. A detailed handbook on witchcraft. It was written by 2 Dominicans, Johann Spranger and Heinrich Kramer, who was himself inquisitor for the Tyrol in Austria, or Tyrol. With a clever theological argument, it linked sorcery with Satan and heresy, misogynistically placing the blame upon women. Witches were predominantly female. At the same time, in order to prevent the celebration of the Black or Satanic Mass, Innocent VIII banned the use of hemp in ritual. With the Inquisition came the next demonization of cannabis, which was said to be a vital ingredient of witches' brews. Used to formulate the Black Sacrament with opium, hemlock, belladonna, and other magical or poisonous plants, it supposedly aided in driving the Satanists into an ecstatic frenzy, making them hungry and acting as an aphrodisiac to ready them for their orgies. When not employed ritually, Hemp seed oil was purportedly a magic constituent of flying ointment, that which witches used to ride their broomsticks. Oh my. The Inquisition may have been efficient in instilling the fear of God in people, but it could not suppress cannabis, which, in a manner of speaking, went underground in Europe at that time. The continued use of it as a medicine and for magical purposes was common knowledge, but few ever spoke about it openly for fear their words might reach the Inquisitor's ear. One who did was a French Benedictine monk and doctor, better remembered for being a satirist than as a priest, Francois Rabelais, from 1483 to 1553. Famously lampooned the church and state in the 4 volumes of his satirical masterpiece, Gargantua and Pantagruel. Okay, this is something. The first of which appeared in 1532, so Gargantua, under the pseudonym Alcofribus Nasir, an anagram of his own name. Now, this is Rabelais we're talking about here. Whilst comical, the books have a serious intention. Satire is powerful. Yes, very powerful. It can be. Addressing many of the social ills of the day and supporting humanist idealism. In the 3rd volume, Rabelais wrote of the herb Pantagruelion. It is quite plainly hemp, and Rabelais was obviously very familiar with it. This is hardly surprising when one considers his father had farmed hemp at Senez, 3 miles southwest of Chinon on the river Vienne. As an intoxicant, cannabis remained largely undiscovered by Europeans, except those few who dabbled in the occult, or scholars, or crusaders, or who had traveled to the east and become aware of hashish. For most, wine and beer were their drugs in Europe at the time. An exception was southern Spain, where Arabs had introduced hashish, certainly by the early 14th century, when Muslim authors were writing about it. Hashish was in common use in Granada in the 1360s. Yet as Muslim influence waned and then ceased under the pressure of Christianity, so too did the use and eventually its memory. The 16th century that's the 1500s, saw a rapid increase in travel, exploration, adventure, colonization, and trade. European merchants and seafarers returning from the Orient brought with them many new discoveries: spices, fruits, precious metals, porcelain, rare timbers, and drugs. Primarily opium and hashish. Amongst the first to bring back hashish were the Portuguese, who established trading posts in the Orient at Goa, which they took after an attack by Afonso de Albuquerque in March 1510. Well, now we know where the name Albuquerque comes from. All right. In March 1510, Malacca on the western coast of Malaysia, taken in 1511, Liampo, now Ningpo, and Macau in China in 1557. The first Portuguese book to be published in the East detailed the use and effect of cannabis, written by Garcia da Horta, a botanist cum doctor who went to Goa in 1534 as physician to the Portuguese viceroy of the Indies. It appeared in 1563 and was entitled Colloquies on the Simples and Drugs and Medicinal Matters of India and a Few Fruits. And of a few fruits. Sorry. What a title. In his book, De Orta, or Da Orta, recorded of Bang, which, from a previous chapter, we know what that is, which he spelt B-A-N-G-U-E. It's usually B-H-A-N-G, but he spelled it different. So here's the quote. This is quotes. Quote, "The Indians get no usefulness from this, unless it is in fact that they become ravished by ecstasy and delivered from all worries and cares, and laugh at the least little thing. After all, it is said that it was they who first found the use of it, when their generals and men of war, exhausted by constant watches, having drunk a little bang with wine or opium, became as if drunk and slept as if delivered from all cares." Well, the wine and the opium had something to do with all that. You know. But yeah, that's close quote from Mr. De Orta. That he also wrote somewhat sensationally of the psychoactive effects of cannabis only enhanced interest in it. And it was not long before physicians across Europe started to regard hemp in a different light. The medical profession was, in fact, very fortunate in having the book in its possession. Not long after his death, De Orta's work was banned in Portugal, and all copies of his books burnt. This had it's bad. This had nothing to do with what they contained. The anti-Semitic Inquisition and the Portuguese Catholic Church had discovered that De Orta had been a Jew who kept his religion secret. That was pretty common in Europe at that time. A lot of parts of Europe at that time. They had to. I mean, whether you agree with anything about them or not, they had to keep it secret. Huh? The Inquisition. You know, come on now. Anyway, it's just crazy. But by chance, Rembertus Dodans rescued a copy of the book and had it translated into English, French, Italian, and Latin. Isn't that something? They were trying to delete it. They were trying to throw it completely down that memory hole. But somebody else came along, picked up a copy. Thank you, Lord, bless his soul, that he did it. Because if somebody wouldn't have had the guts to do that, we wouldn't have it now. Think how easy it would have been to never have known about it at all. It would have been completely gone. Think about how many times that's happened. All through our past. Okay, so hopefully it makes us appreciate what we do have and makes us want to explore to find more out from under that ground, from in those stones here and there, and the stars above us, apparently. Archaeoastronomy. Okay, getting back to it again. Where was I? There we go. So 15 years after the publication of De Orta's book that was almost deleted, right? But it wasn't. Another Portuguese, Cristobal Acosta, published a tract about the drugs and medicines of the East Indies. He added to De Orta's knowledge by outlining what substances were added to bang and for what purpose. It was he who gave a formula for a psychoactive drink containing hashish, cloves, mace, nutmeg, and camphor. In 1596, the famous Dutch explorer of the Arctic Sea, Jan Huygen van Linschoten, who had been clerk to the Archbishop of Goa and had read Deorda's book, published a chronicle of his time in India. Much of his information about Bang, which he also spelt Bangue, like these Europeans didn't really know how to spell the way that the Indians, the subcontinental Indians spelled it. That's something else, man. It's just, was lifted. So Bang, which he also spelled, much of the information about Bang was lifted from Deorda's book and journalistically enhanced or distorted. In the process, he gave the impression that hashish and opium produced similar hallucinogenic effects. A misconception that was to linger in the literature of drugs for a long time. Isn't that horrible? What a supposed scholar can cause for so long. Wow, when they're shitty like that. Anyway, sorry. However, not only the Portuguese and Dutch wrote inaccurately of cannabis. John Fryer, a British East India Company physician, stated in his book, A New Account of East India and Persia Being 9 Years' Travel, 1672 to 1681, published in 1698, that opium was actually made from a mixture of bang and belladonna. That's ignorance. That's just blatant ignorance. I'm spreading it, you know. Freyer and a Frenchman called Bernier also recorded how this potion was used as a means of execution in India. They're just making shit up over in Europe. But not all the European students of cannabis restricted their work to observation. Some tried it for themselves. A French traveler, Laurent Darvaux, who journeyed extensively through the Middle East and Persia in the middle of the 17th century, 1600s, was served hashish, although he was under the impression that it was opium. See there? Thomas Bowery, the captain of a British merchantman who frequently sailed in Indian waters between 1669 and 1679, and published an account of his voyages called A Geographical Account of Countries Round the Bay of Bengal, recounted what effects Bang had on another English seaman. Into the 18th century, 1700s, exploration continued apace, but not without mishap. An expedition sent by King Frederick V of Denmark to the Arabian Peninsula in 1759 met with disaster. Only one of the 5 explorers, a German mathematician named Carsten Niebuhr, surviving it. When his memoirs were published, they contained an account of hashish taken by Sufis. Few governments either saw or decided to investigate the mercantile possibilities of cannabis, but one did. Perhaps inevitably, it was the British. By 1770, the finances of the East India Company, more formally known at the time as the Governor and Company of Merchants of London Trading into the East Indies, were in a shambles due to a famine in Bengal. The board was forced to approach Parliament for a £1 million loan to prevent its collapse. Sound familiar, huh? Old bailout, even back then. Old corporate bailout back then. I see how things go in cycles. Oh, Lordy. The loan was forthcoming with the proviso that the company surrender its operations to parliamentary control. Interesting. Which was duly put in motion by the Regulating Act of 1773 and the India Act of 1784. In order to see a return on the loan, the British government started to impose taxes in India. Figures. In 1790, one of the commodities they taxed was cannabis. This was followed 3 years later by a regulation licensing the production and sale of bhang, ganja, and charas. The British always referring to the different forms of cannabis collectively as Indian hemp drugs. The level of taxation was based upon the potency of the drug. Really? As with so many taxes, it was claimed the imposition was to control consumption. At the same time, alcohol and tobacco were also taxed, supposedly for the same reason. In truth, it was really aimed at raising revenue. Parliament had little genuine interest in the welfare of the native Indian population. That's an understatement. There was some debate as to whether or not to prohibit cannabis. The Indian ruling class blamed social unrest upon it. Scapegoat. But this argument was somewhat spurious, I should say. Bhang was too weak to cause much unrest, whilst charas was too expensive for all but the very wealthy, who were maintaining the status quo in any case. Ganja was cheap and used by the masses, so it came to be a scapegoat for any social problems. Isn't that something? Its suppression being called for. Even the British Governor General wanted all drugs banned. Sound familiar? The British declined. Cannabis was too good a source of tax income. Wow, how things go around. And that's the carrot on the end of the stick in front of the government that us cannabis advocates are trying to use to get them to legalize it, to repeal its prohibition in the correct way. Isn't that something? Those taxes. Okay, here we go. Up to a point, we're about done. We're about done with the chapters. I might as well just finish it. Be cool. Up to a point, cannabis did raise some revenue, but much of it escaped the taxation system. The British could hardly control the tax of a plant that grew as a common weed throughout the subcontinent. Yeah, it's crazy. It's ludicrous. When in 1838 the colonial office mooted an outright ban, Parliament devised a new means of taxation based upon weight rather than hallucinogenic efficacy. It failed. Various states and cities tried different types of management. In Bengal, the authorities applied a quota to the sale of cannabis. In Bombay, dealers had to purchase operating licenses. Whilst in Lucknow, Places of sale had to be officially approved and certificated. Revenues trickled in, but the whole system of control was a mishmash of largely unsuccessful initiatives. What the British did not do was to trade actively in cannabis and establish an international market for it, as they did with opium. Nor did they take it back home with them to Europe on any large scale. That responsibility was left to the other great trading nation of the time, France. In order to illustrate his imperialistic and military superiority, Napoleon Bonaparte decided in 1798 to invade Egypt. His intention being to destroy British trade in the Middle East and, to some extent, the Orient. The invasion was only a partial success. Politically, it established French influence in Egypt and Syria, which then stretched from Turkey to the Red Sea. But militarily, it was a catastrophe, for the British destroyed the French fleet on August 1st at Abu Qir, now spelled different, now, in what was later termed the Battle of the Nile. Without their navy, Napoleon's troops were marooned in Egypt. Isn't that something? The British attacked them, marooned them on the Nile River. It being an Islamic country, alcohol was unavailable. The French troops, without a supply of wine, you know how those French are, you know, acquired a penchant for hashish. So many started using it that in October of 1800, a blanket ban was issued on all drinks containing hashish and any smoking of it. Well, the troops largely ignored the order. Nice. Go troops. Hashish drinks were then outlawed, with cafes that sold them being boarded up and their proprietors incarcerated. All hashish imports were impounded and burned. This had little effect, as most of the hashish came into Egypt over land by caravan across the desert, well beyond excise control. When finally the British blockade was lifted and the French troops could return home, they took their knowledge and liking of hashish and their supply with them. The properties of hashish were soon known in France. Not only returning troops told of its wonders, but so did scholars who had either been attached to Napoleon's army or sent samples back to colleagues for analysis and experimentation. Already, by 1803, substances had been extracted from hashish in the laboratory by a Dr. Viry, a French pharmacologist. The scientific interest in hashish coincided with a renewed fascination with the assassins. Refer to the previous video and chapter. Partly engendered by the French passion for conspiracy and partly by the increase in contact with the Muslim world brought about by the Egyptian-Syrian occupation. At the forefront of this revival was France's most important Arabic scholar, Antoine Isaac. Baron Sylvestre de Sacy. Delving into the Arabic manuscript collection at the Bibliothèque Nationale, he unearthed previously unknown 11th and 12th century chronicles during his study, of which he identified the word assassin with hashish and the hashashin. Again, previous chapter, previous video. He announced his findings in a paper read to the Institute of France on May 19, 1809, entitled Memoirs on the Dynasty of the Assassins and the Origin of Their Name. Whilst he was correct in his etymology, Desassy did not, however, appreciate the fact that this was a derogatory word and did not mean the assassins were actual hashish users. Nevertheless, he consolidated and brought into modern times the belief that the assassins had used hashish and lent them a further salaciousness by declaring that hashish caused not only ecstasy, but also insanity leading to death. Wow. Others were quick to jump on the assassin bandwagon. The 1001 Nights was translated into all the major European languages. It quickly gained a licentious reputation and was in print for most of the 19th century, 1800s. The Austrian Orientalist Joseph von Hammer-Purgstall published his History of the Assassins in 1818. It warned of the pernicious corruption of secret societies and likened the assassins to Jesuits, Freemasons, and Knights Templar. For those outside the realms of academia, the opportunity to see what all the fuss was about was never far away. Travelers freely brought hashish back from the Levant or Egypt. There were no restrictions on importation into any European country, not even excise duty. For those who could not journey abroad, there were domestic supplies. Just as pharmacists had stocked tincture of opium for several centuries, so by the 1840s were they carrying hashish, usually suspended in an oil or heavy wine such as port or sherry, which in effect would be like a tincture when you put it in, alcohol base. When you have an alcohol base with it in it, that's a tincture. Okay. If it's something else based, then it's something else. Anyway. At first, hashish taking was restricted to a small coterie of former French colonial troops and scholars, but gradually it entered intellectual circles when it was thought it might enrich creative power. End of chapter. Herb Pantagruelion. That was chapter 6. Okay. Hey, we did another chapter in a video, and it didn't take as long this time. It was a shorter chapter, and I probably interrupted a few times less. So that made up for it. But chapter 7, we're just right along in here. Look at here. Look at our progress. That's pretty daggone good, y'all. À la mode du hashish. It's a French title. À la mode du hashish. And hashish is spelled very different, I guess, in French. It's H-A-C-H-I-S-C-H. It's like hashish. Hashish. Say it the similar way. Anyway. Chapter 7. All right, I'm not looking. It starts 1820. So we're kind of working our way up, like I said in another previous video, part of this book. And it goes slowly through time, forward. Jumps back some every now and then, but goes forward mostly. And so we're kind of in the early 1800s at this point. But, each chapter is very different, and he does jump around. So it keeps you, kind of guessing as where the next chapter is going to lead. So that's cool. Chapter 7. Alamo du Hashish. So I assume, I'm closing the book. I assume, because I don't remember, it's been years and years since I read it. I assume we're going to get into more of the French side of things. He did a little bit there, touching on Napoleon and going to Egypt and how the British blockaded them in the Nile River, trapped them there. Napoleon, there's a lot of things about Napoleon in Egypt. I think Napoleon was personally interested in Egypt, the history, the archaeology that was just starting off there. And it was just in its infancy as a kind of a practice science, that they were actually going out in the field and starting to have archaeological digs in the 1700s, late 1700s, during Napoleon's younger life. And so, yeah, of course, he's, there's a lot about him saying, there's direct quotes of him talking very warmly, glowingly about Egypt and the experience he had there. It was more than just what the book just now told you about as far as a military campaign. Yeah, I'm sure that was a big part of it, but he was doing that, but he used that to attach onto that his own personal kind of wanting to go there, wanting to kind of be directly involved in the early archaeological movement, you could say, science in that time period. And that archaeology kind of, that's why you have a separate branch of archaeology now called Egyptology, and it's its own branch off. That they, that they were early archaeologists, and they kind of developed it sort of in a way for the rest of the field going forward all over the world. So it was a big deal, and the way Napoleon invested in it, was interested in it himself, that really made a difference, because not a whole lot of world leaders like that, leaders of nations, get that interested and involved in the exploration of the past in the way of archaeology that we have developed. So he was fascinated by that, I think, and yeah, maybe grew as a person along the way. No pun intended for Napoleon. He actually wasn't that short for those times and places. But that was something that kind of was attached to him later as a piece of propaganda against him to belittle him, literally, in our history now. I think there's a lot about Napoleon. He wasn't all good. He wasn't all bad. He's one of them. He's one of those. So, he's interesting. The people that were against him, certain British powers that were against him, and other European powers that hated him. And a lot of that had to do with, French Revolution right before he took power. So it's a very interesting part of our more recent, I would consider that more recent history. The French Revolution and then Napoleon's time. And then what this touched on when he got to Egypt. But see, it's possible, it is actually maybe even likely, that without Napoleon being all his flawed self, and the main goal of a military operation down there, to cut off economical routes from their competitors and all that, like the book said, that there was more going on than just that. It's just really cool that they might not have found the Rosetta Stone. Nobody might have ever found it, or it would have been found 100 years later, or 200 years later, or the other day. in Egypt, because it was like, because of him and the French forces being there at that time, and then all the archaeology, like I was saying, had already started. And there's British and French there doing that. And they were kind of competing. They're doing that too. You know, they might, nobody might have ever found the Rosetta Stone when they did, you know, and or ever. As you know, the sands of the desert shift around, shifting sands. They really do. So something's sticking up out of it one day, the very next day it's completely covered again. That really happens. And that also happens on the sea floor. Think of that. The way the currents shift, the way the sands shift, rocks and this and that. Things move because of the forces over top of them moving this way and that. That the sea floor actually reveals things every now and then covers them back up again. And the desert does too. So those places with sand like that, sea floor and the deserts of the world, whew, it's tough to do archaeology. It's tough to get under there, you know. And something will stick up one day and then be gone. And it might not stick up again for another 100 years. Who knows? Just depending on the weather pattern or the ocean current if it's under on the seafloor. So yeah, really cool. I've always loved archaeology and the idea of it, but I do not like the conformist mindset of it's almost like an orthodoxy. It's, you know, in a way, as I view it, corrupted it. And science shouldn't be about orthodoxies. You know, I know that you have to have kind of like a main prevailing theory, I guess, but the way they discount the other stuff, I just don't want to call everything pseudoscience when it doesn't fit into their timelines and their ways of fitting everything together the way they want. It's almost like having a puzzle and the person has scissors and they just start and of course they can put the puzzle together with scissors, cutting up all the pieces, smushing them together, making them, forcing them to fit together. That's how I kind of view Egyptology today. So bless the truth seekers, and they are everywhere. There's some Egyptologists, probably not the main elite ones, but there's some Egyptologists, the young ones, the idealistic ones, still haven't been crushed by those certain ones at the top of that club, because that's kind of what it is, and that's why I don't like it. When things become too exclusive, that's trouble. Especially for something that's supposed to be, you know, based on science. It's not supposed to be exclusive. Inclusivity is the way to go with science and exploration and all that. And research, you know. Hard to start researching one thing and not have to deal with things popping up, you know, that are related. And needing to understand those things to an extent, at least, so that you can continue down the path you originally went down with your research. So anyway, I'm just talk. We ended chapter. We're on chapter 7. It'll be part 10 next. Y'all have a nice night, and I hope you got something from it. Hope it makes you think. And maybe go do some research, do some search, use those search engines, use YouTube search engine. You know, there's some interesting videos out there. You might find things you didn't know were on YouTube. And if you see something you're interested in and you're like, oh, what was that? I didn't know that was on here. go to that person's channel, subscribe to them, so you build a new algorithm based on what you want. Okay, that's how it works with that thing. Don't just click on videos that pop up to you. Go to search, go to the search bar, use it. And then when you have a lot of subscriptions and you don't see certain things for a while, it's like, hey, what happened to that? How come I never see him anymore pop up on my homepage? Well, you can go to your subscriptions section of your YouTube and go down the thing and look and find them that way. And then once you watch them again, it'll come back into your home page again. That's how it works with that. So y'all have a good night. See you later. We'll do the next chapter on the next video.